Thank you for joining us here this morning. My name is Jeff English. I'm VP of Marketing and Communications with Pulse Canada, and I'll be moderating today's press conference. We're pleased to be joined by agriculture groups, both provincial, regional, and national, to discuss the impending labor disruption on Canada's railways. Just a couple housekeeping items before we introduce our speakers. After speakers make their remarks, we'll be moving to questions from media. There's a couple ways to do that. There is a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen where questions can be put at any time. You can also raise your hand and we will unmute you. Questions can be directed to any one of our panelists, speakers here today, and we will be happy to direct it to the most appropriate member who can help answer your question. With that, I'm going to introduce Terry Yuzwa. He's Chair of Pulse Canada to deliver brief remarks and kick us off. Terry, over to you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being with us this morning. I'm Terry Yuzwa. I'm a farmer from Nipawin, Saskatchewan, and Chair of Pulse Canada. I'm pleased to be joined by colleagues of mine from a wide range of sectors across Canada's ag industry. Most of us farmers are getting ready for harvest or are already in the combine. Instead of focusing on the task at hand, we find ourselves staring down a rail stoppage of historic proportions. Tonight, the possibility of a lockout or strike on both national rail carriers becomes reality. As we have said for weeks, the federal government could prevent this with the stroke of a pen by invoking Section 107 of the Labor Code and sending the parties to binding arbitration. Frankly, it's mind-boggling that 150 years after the last spike was pounded, we are still trying to convince the federal government that functioning railways are important. Hundreds of millions of dollars of grains are delivered to elevators every week with the expectation that they will soon move on to fulfill contracts here in Canada and around the world. And if grain is not able to be delivered, farmers aren't getting paid. With no rail service, grain deliveries and cash flow comes to a screeching halt. We get increased costs, zero cash flow, and our reputation as a reliable supplier is forever damaged. We stand here today calling on the federal government to enforce binding arbitration and avoid this unnecessary economic disruption. There is time, but it's running out. The government must act now and save our country the economic pain and reputational damage. Thanks for allowing me to have some comments, and I'll turn it over to Andre Harp now, Chair of the Grain Growers of Canada, for further comments.
Yeah, thank you very much, Terry. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this morning. My name is Andre Harp, and I'm a grain farmer from Northern Alberta, as well as the Chair of Grain Growers of Canada and Vice Chair of the Canadian Canola Growers Association. I'm here to share our concerns with the devastating impact that a work stoppage of both Canada's national railways would have on 65,000 grain farmers from across this country. With 94% of grain transported by rail, there's simply no alternative for farmers to use. Growers rely on grain elevators situated on rail lines to deliver that grain. With harvest having just begun, many farmers are looking to sell their grain after months of growing their crops. Our research indicates that the unprecedented dual work stoppage will cost grain farmers $43 million a day next week, and that will increase to $50 million a day after the week after. Simply put, rail transportation is essential to delivering the grain that Canadians on the world rely on. That is why grain farmers are asking for the government to use all powers available to avoid a shutdown tomorrow at all costs. I think you've heard Terry talk about Section 107 for binding arbitration, and we fully support that. This has to get solved quickly. Thank you very much for joining us, and I'll be happy to take questions later. I'm going to turn over to Dean Roberts now.
Thank you, Andre. Good morning, everyone. I'm Dean Roberts, and I'm a farmer from Colville, Saskatchewan. I also serve as the Vice Chair of the Board of Directors for the Canola Council of Canada. The Canola Council represents all segments of the canola value chain, including approximately 40,000 canola farmers like myself. We also represent exporters, canola processors, and life science companies. With grain farmers out in the field starting harvest, we are already feeling the effects of a potential work stoppage across the Class 1 railways. In fact, one of my local elevators has already started rationing space for grain deliveries. This is negatively impacting my ability to manage cash flow and pay my bills. When a work stoppage comes into full effect, the impacts will only become more acute for canola farmers and the entire canola value chain. And to put some color to that, what we're talking about from a canola seed export perspective, we risk losing approximately $11 million per day in exports, together with another 20 plus million per day in lost crush as a result of idle canola processing facilities. The economic impact of the canola value chain is massive and likely impossible to recover. And the numbers I cited are limited to losses experienced during the service disruption and do not account for potential future losses resulting from the effects of the stoppage on our international reputation. The stoppage will harm our international reputation as a reliable supplier with global customers at a time when we are seeing increased competition, protectionism, and volatility in global markets. Make no mistake, unless the parties reach an agreement or unless the government is willing to take decisive action to prevent a work stoppage, we are sleepwalking into a calamity. We urge the federal government to invoke Section 107 of the Canada Labour Code to maintain industrial peace and move the parties to binding arbitration to avoid a work stoppage. The time for action is now. The stakes are too high to sit back and hope for the best. Thank you. And I'll turn things over now to Pierre Lepron for the Canadian Federation of Agriculture.
Thanks, Dean. Yes, I'm Pierre Lampron. I'm the second vice president of the Canadian Federation of Agriculture, and I'm a dairy farmer in Quebec. The CFA is Canada's largest general farms organization, representing over 190,000 farmers and farm families across Canada. Thousands of farmers and rangers across the country then export. It's important for them, while thousands needs rail service to get access to critical inputs such as fertilizer and propane. The simultaneous strike affecting services on both Class 1 railway will have a devastating impact on the transportation of goods into the fall harvest. In addition to the shipment of key agriculture products to make, such as grain and oilseeds, farmers in many parts of Canada require a steady and stable supply of propane for grain drying, greenhouse production, and heating and cooling the livestock barns. The inability to access these products at critical stage of production will result in food loss and animal welfare concerns as we approach colder winter and face a backlog of livestock slaughterhouse capacity. As we speak, farmers across Canada are facing down the sad reality of this situation. A strike affecting both railway will impact producers out west and in the prairies, in Ontario, and Quebec, where I live, as well as the Maritime, where rail provide critical access to propane and approximately 60% of the container cargo out at the port of Halifax. As a business owner and farmer who cares about the health and well-being of my family, farm, and livestock, I cannot stress enough how important it is all parties involved in the negotiation to do everything possible to reach an agreement before the strike deadline. That also means the government, if the railway and union cannot reach a deal today, then the Minister of Labour must take the necessary step to make a deal happen. From where we sit, that look like bending and arbitration. This has gone on too long, and the impact will be felt for weeks, if not months. We have a responsibility to Canadian farmers to resolve this situation today. Thank you, and I move to Sylvain Fornès. À toi, Sylvain.
Thank you. So I'm Sylvain Fournaise, a representative of the Canadian Meat Council. I'm a member of the board of the Canadian Meat Council. I was the chair of CMC when we had the COVID pandemic. So I'm very well placed to talk about the huge impact a crisis may have on our industry. I'm working also for Olimel as Vice President of Food Safety and Quality Management and R&D. I don't want to repeat what has already been said or written on that subject. I would like maybe just to share two examples of the impact that the strike may have or the disruption in rail transportation may have. So Olimel is the largest exporter of chilled pork product in Japan, with an average of 70 containers per week. And we are the only country in the world with such a long distance on the ground to reach the Vancouver port. And we rely on train transportation to get to the port in a timely fashion. Because the chilled pork has a limited shelf life. So if we cannot count on rail transportation, this will have a huge impact on the exportation of meat in Japan and Asia. And it's going to have also an impact because we will not be able to sell those meat and we will lose the value of that meat. On the other side, also, we have to think about the importation of product. We also rely on the rail transportation for the supply of ingredient used to process our products that are sold and consumed in Canada. So halt in supply of those ingredients will result in empty shelves in grocery stores. So these are two real examples of the impact that it's going to have on the meat industry. So on that, I think we are now ready to get and answer any question the media may have. Thank you.
Thank you to all the panelists, and thank you to those on the line. As I said before, there's two options for questions for any of our speakers or attendees. One is a raise hand function, and we will unmute you, and you could ask your question. The second would be to put it directly into the Q&A. So we'll start with those raising their hands, and then we will move to those on the Q&A. So I see Promit, who has raised their hand, and I will unmute you now. Or if you can unmute yourself and ask your question, please.
Okay, am I audible now properly?
Yes, you are. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Jeff, for organizing this, and thank you, gentlemen. We all know that this is going to have a very devastating impact, but considering that a lot of these, both the railways have already started putting embargoes, have you already started seeing some impact? And in this week, can you quantify what kind of impact has that been? And second question is, do you think the impact can also go towards employment numbers, and you will see a lot of temporary workers or regular workers losing their jobs if it drags on? Any numbers for that will be very helpful. Thank you.
I would put that to any of our maybe Sylvain or Andre, Pierre. Jump in, please.
Yeah, yes, maybe I can just say something about that. As you know, they have already stopped the transportation of perishable product last week in prevision of that strike. So in our company, we had to make sure that we have an alternative for the transportation of product, and this alternative will be very, very costly, about 3 times the cost of the rail transportation if we use that alternative to try to get our product at the port of Vancouver. This is one example of an immediate impact that we are now living with without a strike.
I'm just going to add to that. Even last week, I talked to 2 of the line companies that I deal with, Viterra and Richardson, and they had already indicated to me, and that they had already stopped taking grain last week, and they were doing a hard stop this week just because they knew the strike was coming. So it's already started. You know, some of the costs that are, you know, directly to farmers, it gets back to some of these crops basically are not meant to be stored, so we have to figure out how to store these. But at the same time, some of us, a lot of farmers have contracts, and I for one do have a contract that I was hoping to directly off the farm, and that's just, and I think was talked about earlier, expressly for cash flow, and we have to start paying back some of the costs that we invested in this spring.
Thank you, guys, and thank you for the question. We'll move to one. Just a reminder to raise your hand to any media on the line who are interested in asking a question, or you can type it directly into the Q&A. We'll move to one in the Q&A here, asking about rail disruption impacting any Canadian fruit or vegetable products, either domestically or heading south. Perhaps CFA, whether Keith or Pierre, is that something you'd be able to speak to?
Yeah, sure, Jeff. I can jump in here, and the answer is absolutely. Fruit and vegetable horticulture commodities are those perishable commodities that really we've got into a just-in-time delivery system in Canada now, and certainly perishable products are ones that we cannot store for long terms. We don't have the storage capacity to do so, so they must move. Those products not moving not only results in farmers not being able to harvest those crops, and we are entering the harvest season for many of those crops. But also, as was spoken about earlier, the loss of international markets for those crops would be gone. And so we're jeopardizing not only farmers' incomes now, but in the future as well. So certainly the movement of those products is critical at this point.
Thanks, Keith. And just to
and
add
also,
on that,
also Jeff,
go ahead, Keith.
I was just going to add to a comment made earlier, or a question made earlier about potential workers. Many of our horticultural operations also have seasonal ag workers that are employed, and if they can't harvest the product because of a lack of storage, then those workers won't be working either. So that could jeopardize that program in the future as well.
Thank you, Pierre. Were you gonna?
No, just a short comment. Just to imagine if all the transportation should a truck, we need more truck. We don't have enough alternative to try to replace all the trains, so it will be a big impact for everyone. I agree. Horticulture too.
Thank you, and thanks for the question. We'll move to a question from John Norman from Glacier Farm. Is anyone hearing about questions from international customers questioning Canada's reliability as a trade partner? And if so, are there specific examples that could be provided? I think probably each one of the panelists would be able to take a stab at this, but I'll maybe open the floor if someone wants to kick us off, and we can go around.
It's Terry here. Every time we meet with customers, reliability of supply is a concern. We operate in a competitive environment, and the buyers of our products have choices in where they get the product. An example would be India, where a tariff is can be reopened at the end of October. So we have a very limited opportunity to meet that market demand now during harvest with pulse products like peas. And beyond October 31, that market may not be there. So we completely lose it. We've already got widening basis levels happening because of this. We're getting no movement. So yeah, reliability of supply. Once your reputation is damaged, it's forever damaged. And you have to work hard to maintain that relationship, and you will never be at you may never be back to normal or where you were before.
I was just going to add to that. This is Shauna Matheson. I'm the executive director of the Prairie Oak Growers Association. So on a recent trade mission to an Asian country just this year, it was mentioned by a few companies that Canada has a great product, but it's not reliable for on-time shipments. There have been so many strikes in the last few years too, over the last 10 years, more than I can count. So with that said, we're definitely losing our reliability. And based on Canada's reputation from the transportation crisis of 2014, We have one company in the US, and it's a very large buyer for us, that has still said they will not purchase 100% of their oats from Canada because they cannot rely on Canada for a reliable source. Based on that, we need not only a reliable fix now, we need it long term. Our customers rely on Canadian products, and they're being forced to turn to our competitors, and we can't afford that. We need long-term solutions, and we need binding arbitration to make that work now.
I might tag on to the end of that, Shauna. Our trade partners are definitely watching. A letter was recently sent to the Prime Minister's office from 35 US ag industry groups who are concerned about the impact of this strike on trade. They're concerned about the integrated supply chains between our two countries and how exposed agriculture is to this disruption. The rail service is an essential part of our supply chain, not just grain going to market, but things like fertilizer coming back into the country. Right now, we should be looking at buying fertilizer for next year's crop, but we haven't had a price reset. And this rail strike really isn't helping that either. So it's not just the outboard exports, but some of our imports could be impacted as well.
And if I can add on it also, we worked very hard since the early 90s. We worked very hard with Japanese customer to build a very good relationship with them. And each time that something happened like this, they lose the confidence in the change supply in Canada, supply chain in Canada. And this is always questioned. And if you look in the past, we had that strike at the port of Vancouver. We had the fire in BC. We had the rail was blocked also some years ago. So each time that something like this happened, since what I said before, the fact that we are the only country with that such a long distance on the ground to reach the port, they always question that, and they reduce their order of product because there is a lack of confidence. So we need to work very hard to maintain and to build that confidence, and maybe that strike will again have a huge impact. And as it was mentioned, it would be very difficult to get back to the level of business we have right now. It may take years to get back at the level we are right now if we have that disruption.
Well, thank you for those responses. I see a hand up from Lindsay Smith from Real Agriculture. Lindsay, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, thank you. In looking at this and hearing just how incredibly catastrophic this impending strike would be, we do have an option. The Labour Minister has the option under Section 107 of the Canada Labour Code to impose binding arbitration, but we haven't seen that. So my question, I guess, would be, is there any indication as to why the Labour Minister has not stepped in at this point? Has anybody had any direct conversations to figure out where the government is on this and why they're not willing to take action?
Thanks, Lindsay. Well, maybe Andre or Terry, is there anyone who wants to tackle that?
Well, I think the government is like everybody else. I think they're hoping that, the two parties get together like adults and sit down and work out their differences. Even binding arbitration is basically, a third party getting people together and working together. But that's, I think the government's really hoping that CN and the union sit down and work together and come up with something that they can work with. And I think, it gets back to there's a lot of parties, there's a lot of discussion, but I think they're waiting just to see what happens because, realistically, this, the strike starts tomorrow. So I do know the minister is in Calgary this morning meeting with the two parties. So I'm hoping he can get things worked out.
I think Andre's worded it quite well. It's really, it'll become a much sadder affair if things are not resolved. When we all work together and are a reliable supplier and freight moves both ways, everybody wins. But in this situation, nobody is winning. Where's the mutual beneficialness? Where's the win-win relationships? I don't see who's winning in this situation at all. And for someone who's in close contact with that, I can pull Greg Northey into this conversation, and you've done some interviews with him recently, Lindsay.
Yeah, Lindsay, I mean, I think it was well said. The government is hoping that the negotiations can happen on their own. It's always been their standpoint, right? That they prefer a negotiated deal. And so they've been reluctant. In fact, the minister said he wouldn't use 107 last week in response to CN. So I think today is crucial, right? Because I think they can see not just from agriculture, but from all sectors that this can't happen. And so he's there. He'll see what as it's happening, and that's why we're continuing to push for intervention before we see the disruption.
Thanks, everybody. I have another question from Tim Parent, I believe from City in Calgary, with respect to transportation message. So the question reads, are there any alternative methods available to ship your products if rail services are interrupted, and how feasible are they? So maybe somebody from the grain sector, and then Sylvain, if you'd like to comment from the meat side of things.
You know, short answer is no. You know, there can be some loads hauled out by truck, but that's very, very few. Yes, particularly up in northern Alberta, 95% of what we grow in northern Alberta is destined for export out to the coast, and to get that out to the coast by truck is actually, it's just not feasible. Like, there's a few short things can be fixed, but for the most part, no, we cannot. We rely on train. This country has been built on rail, and this is what we rely on.
I'll just add a couple of more points to what Andre said. It's not just agriculture. The bulk of our economy moves by rail. So it's not just the grains, but it's fertilizer, it's potash. Everything needs a ride to the coast by rail. So it's thousands and thousands of trucks per day. It's simply not feasible for us to reach the coast by truck.
And I was just going to add to that just a bit to say there's simply not enough trucks and truck drivers. We're already at a shortage in many areas for that. We wouldn't even make a dent even if we had all of them going. And to Dean's comment, we have a lot of other items that are going on rail. There's also fuel sources that are going for heating homes in the winter, and oil. So what I have seen is that grain products won't even be the first one to get prioritized later for obvious reasons. There's other things that have to move as well. So even once everything gets moving again, I still expect delays because, as people have mentioned, trains have already been stopped. In some cases, some trains were stopped as early as August 12th. And so catching up on that will still take a little bit of time, even if no official strike happens.
If I can add on it, for sure, for the meat industry, we can also use a truck, but we are challenged with the availability of those trucks. Also, for each truck, we need 2 or 3 drivers to get from Quebec to Vancouver in a timely fashion. And as I mentioned in my introduction, it is also 3 times the cost of the rail. So it's quite complicated to find the number of truck we need, and also the number of drivers we need, and also it has a huge cost impact on transport.
Thank you. Thank you, Sylvain. Please.
Jeff, I was just going to make one more comment that even if we were able to do it, and I realize it's just not physically possible, the environmental impact should also be considered too, because having that many trucks on the road would also have a negative impact on our environmental footprint here in Canada compared to hauling one train, say, all the way from Quebec to Vancouver.
Thank you, Shauna. We're coming up on time here, but Lindsay, I see your hand up again, so we'll unmute you, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you for taking another question. Shauna, you're definitely thinking the way I am. I guess my question is thinking about the language of this Liberal government, thinking about the carbon impact potentially of having all this rail shut down and then having to go to trucks. is anyone having that conversation about the fuel efficiency of moving by rail versus truck and the carbon emissions difference between the two of them and the importance there?
I'll open that one up. It's certainly a different and important angle, but Terry, Andre, Dean, Sylvain, Pierre, anybody who wants to jump on that one.
I don't know if I have a great answer for you, Lindsay, but a stat that I saw shared, I believe early last week, just the scale of the problem and why it's simply not feasible to go to trucks. Canpotex, for their train traffic, for 1 week is the equivalent of 10,000 trucks on the road, is what they would need to offset their rail needs. So it's just simply not feasible. And I realize that's not really answering your question, but it is just speaking to the scale of the problem again.
I can maybe jump in here too, Jeff, because I did have a conversation with the minister last week, and I did raise these points about the environmental impact and also the impact on the infrastructure on the roads that the trucks are using, and how that would then become a responsibility of the municipality to look after with the increased truck traffic pounding our roads. So it has been raised with the minister by me, and the response was, as you heard earlier, he's more concerned with letting the collective bargaining process play out the way it's supposed to. So I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on everyone. This is not just impactful for agricultural products, but it's really for all Canadians, as was raised earlier. So it's a really important issue that they consider getting this deal done quicker rather than later.
Thanks, Keith. Shauna?
Yes, I just wanted to finalize with one comment that I had actually reached out to Quorum Corporation yesterday just to get a better idea of what they expect the long-term implication of this if a strike were to happen. And the comment that came back from them is that a 1-week strike could impact up to 14 weeks for those railways to catch up. If that's the case, that's December 4th. That's a huge implication on our entire economy. And if it is December 4th, I think we all know that the railroads slow down typically when it gets cold weather or if there's a lot of snow. So we're butting right up against that as well. This is a huge problem and an issue for all of Canada, for grains, but also pretty much every sector in Canada, and obviously anything that would run by rail.
Thank you, Shauna. Maybe that's a good place to cap it. So I want to thank everybody for their interest today, and media for turning out, and obviously to our panelists and speakers. As was mentioned on the call, this is the 11th hour, and this group will be continuing our push. For more information, you can visit stopthestrike.ca, or please get in touch with any and all of us on this call right now. Thank you very much for your interest, and have a great day.
Thank you.